Are you ready to learn how to fleece your opponents at the poker table? That was a dad joke. I became a dad 3 weeks ago. This is my first day back from paternity leave. We were back in the Carrot Corner studios, and while I was on paternity leave, I was doing this night shift, sort of 9 p.m. to 3 in the morning stint with baby, feeding him, changing him, in between playing some poker, of course. And it's been a really nice time. I've really enjoyed that sort of dim lit baby beside me playing some poker. It just put me into like my A game mode. I don't know why. And it got me thinking that A game is not what it seems. The key to A game is not to study 10 sims before you play, to watch 16 videos in a week, to cram your brain full of poker concepts to the point where it's a big, bursting, inaccessible soup of mess. No, A game poker is more subtle than that. It's more of a state of being. It's a mode of mind. And in today's video, I'm going to show you what I think are the 5 most important attributes to unlock to play your A game more often. Each of these is demonstrated with a hand I played over the past few nights of looking after baby and playing some 200 Russian cash. Let's get into it. I hope you like it. Let me know if you agree, disagree, down in the comments, and enjoy. The first key to unlocking your A game in poker is open-mindedness. This involves not just taking that most trodden path of least resistance, avoiding the temptation to do the habitualized, and instead having the patience and curiosity and foresight to say, is there something better? What could be the merits of a different line here? And really thinking about EV and engaging with the game in a curious way as you go. In this hand here, we have the Ace-4 of hearts, and we min-open, we get called by the small blind, which is a pretty common occurrence in a soft pool. 200 Russian cash has some very good players in it. It also has quite a lot of bad players in it as well. It's a very weird ecosystem. And this goes 3-way. The flop is King-Jack-4. I think there's quite a lot of merit to c-betting a hand like this. It has a ton of future improvability. It has 5 outs to stuff that's relatively nutty. It benefits a lot from fold equity even when it has the best hand, and it can of course fold out better hands like pocket pairs and get called by worse hands that might not even bluff us off later in a fishy pool. So lots of reasons to bet here. And I think when villain leads half pot as a small blind, some of these reasons still apply to raising. So I decided to actually, instead of just making the very routine, we're getting 3-1, we have showdown value, we have the backdoor sort of play, I thought, well, you know what, if he's leading a jack here, which they could easily be, raise might just get through. People do bet fold a jack here in a 3-way pot sometimes. If he's leading a king, that's not great, but we do have plenty of ways of improving and quite a lot of implied odds if we do improve. And if we do have the best hand, we're raising here, getting called by hands we're a bit ahead of, like Queen 10 or Ace 10 or something like that, club, and also maybe even getting some other hands to fold, like pocket pair or whatever that's leading sometimes. So I figured there's quite a lot of decent things that can happen here by raising. Another advantage is that when we just call and we face a turn bet from whatever draw villain has, we're going to be folding on a lot of cards with this holding. Whereas when we raise here, we're kind of getting free passes to the river. That's not a sufficient reason to raising the flop. We do have to qualify this in terms of denial and bluffing, like villain can fold better, and we get useful fold equity and value in the sense that we have some outs to improve to really big hands and win big pots sometimes. We're also a little bit deeper here, which feeds into the backdoor flush draw that bit more. And so I think raise is actually a nice line in this spot. I don't think that this is a spot where you have to resign yourself to just calling. Don't be too habitual or pessimistic about your fold equity here. Consider raising. And if these, we call it in the Carrot Poker School, the taps or faucets of the betting sink, right? Protection, bluff, and value. If 2 or more of these are flowing quite heavily, which I think they are on the flop, then there are reasons to raise. It might not just be one singular reason, like thick value or clear bluff. It's a mixed bag of reasons. And if enough of those taps are flowing into the sink fills up to a high enough point, then you can begin to be aggressive. That's the kind of teachings of grade 2 lecture 6 anyway. We turn to pair here. Villain leads again for half pot. I think this is a pretty mergy semi-capping action. Like I do think people can have the nuts here. They can have Queen 10, and this is just like what they think is a big bet. But for a lot of recreationals, they would have just bet bigger with Queen 10 here, or the one combo of pocket 4s or whatever. So I think this is mostly going to be pair plus draw, and 2 pair. That's going to be the bulk of the range. We are ahead of most of that raising is an option here. The only two pair we're losing to is ace-4, which is quite heavily blocked, but you never know about the offsuit combos in this pool, and ace-jack. So I think this call is okay, but I think raising the turn here also deserves a bit of investigation. And then we go for the pretty standard value bet on the river here. Mostly we're going to be running into like king 10, king queen, queen jack, jack 10, ace 10, stuff like that. Maybe the odd hand that beats us, but we have a huge hand here, no doubt. I think queen 10 and ace jack plus is extremely discounted now in villain's range. I went for this sizing. I felt there would be a bit of elasticity on this river. It's not the sort of spot where they just have like a common hand class that calls huge bets. I think it's the kind of spot where they have second pair a lot, third pair a lot. They're quite sensitive to sizing. They're mostly capped. If I go all in here, for example, I do think the fold equity is absolutely through the roof, which probably indicates that that's a good bluff line. And if I want to go all in here as a bluff, I probably don't want to take that line for value, although there are exceptions to that. So we go for this sizing. We get kind of crying station called by the king 10 offsuit, which played abysmally on every single street of this hand. And that's why you want to open wider pre-guys than just ace-4 here. So if I had ace-4 offsuit here, I would also have opened the cutoff, even though that's kind of like neither here nor there in theory. And there's a video coming out on that next about hotspots, and I highly recommend that you watch it. I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to be a real eye-opener. So yeah, open-mindedness is the first key to A-game poker. And I think by raising the flop here and embarking on that line, we definitely went down that road here of just asking and being curious and being patient and waiting, you know? Not just being this compulsive ADHD clicking the button that I always click because I get a very quick dopamine hit from it. Then I'm going to go ahead and click the next button. Like, is that really living? Is that really exploring? Is that thinking? Is that good poker? No, it's D-game. Don't play your D-game. Play your A-game. Be open-minded. The next key to A-game poker is hand reading. We talk about this a lot in the True EV series, which you subscribers on Carrot Corner can watch. Hand reading is just so important. It's almost a lost art these days. It's neglected. There's so much bad content out there where people are just solely talking about how to get closer to a solver. Oh, I think this is a high frequency, blah, blah, blah. Or if we do this with our bluffs, we would do this with value. We're doing this for value because we would bluff in this way. This weird obsession, this main character syndrome, this putting my own range construction before the EV of my hand, even in spots where we're not playing tough regs that are close to balance. We're playing against recreational players. It's a well-known fact at this point, guys, that the vast majority of your money in poker comes from very bad opposition, from the bottom 10 or 20% of the player pool. They are the ones that have the spiraling out of control loss rates that gives you a big win rate. But in order to maximize that, to beat that player for 43 BB per 100, you know, just you against them in some hand instead of 12, requires that you take a giant exploit. Whereas when you're against the reg, okay, if you retreat into some GTO fortress, you might miss out on a bit of exploited VV or a lot in some spots. But against the recreational, this is even more criminal because you can miss out on like double digits big blind per 100 win rates against these players. So here, hand reading is really important. We go for a 3-bet. This is not my standard sizing. I intentionally size this up solely because I am, you know, I have aces. I am a bit deep against the recreational player. I'm in an absolutely dream spot here. Put more money in the pot. I could go bigger still. Normally I go to like 8 there. 7.9, I'd make like the min-thin isolation 3-bet with a really wide range, trying to get into that favorable node really often. More about that in the next video, but here I decide to just go bigger and pile more money into the pot against a known recreational who just 3x'd under the gun. Flop comes ace 10-9, and there's a few options here. We do block the toppest pair, but we also unblock, if we're hand reading properly, we unblock a lot of really good hands in villain's range that are clearly continuing, like 10s, 9s, 10-9, ace-9 suited, ace-10 suited, all sorts of draws, that kind of thing. But I think a good sizing here is just third pot still, getting called by all gutters, trying to open the door to as many bluff raises as possible. Some recreational players do bluff raise a lot, or spew raise a lot in 3-bet pots because they start to get quite attached. This is an MDA thing. You wouldn't think it, right? But it does happen. Villain does go for the raise here. What is villain's range? Is villain's range A, polarized and contains a lot of low equity bluffs, or is it B, equity driven and quite value heavy? So while I said that they can go for bluffs in these spots, this is under the gun against button, and this is ace 10-9 two-tone. So this is not like some late position spot where I bet small on 8-6 deuce rainbow. That's where I think I get raised by quite a lot of low equity bluffs there, like quite a lot of random things. I think on ace 10-9, I'm mainly getting raised by high equity bluffs like queen jack, maybe some gutter, maybe not, then some flush draw, and then mostly just value hands. I think this is going to be as mergy as ace king sometimes, and I think ace king doesn't actually 4-bet pre. a lot of the time in the recreational player's shoes here. I know we block a6 heavily, and it looks like we have the board locked up, blah, 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 but we actually unblock all high equity draws and all lower sets. And I think that's the bulk of Villain's range. So blockers are kind of a trap, right? When you play this hand solely based on blockers and not based on what the actual recreational player's range is for making this flop raise, you go really wrong. Because if Villain does have 10-9, Ace-King, Ace-10, Ace-9, there's still a bunch of combos. Ace-King is still 3 combos, right? It's as many combos as a set, even though it's blocked heavily if he's not 4-betting it. If Villain has Queen-Jack, high equity draw, flush draw, 4-5 of hearts, whatever, 3-betting is the best play. It's the best play against draws because it ensures money goes in before they brick, and it's the best play against value because it ensures money goes in before the board runs out Jack of Hearts, 8 of Hearts. Just for example, there are many runouts that kill action that are not that grotesquely hideous. So I think 3-betting here is the right play. I think you're very frequently going to run into a value hand or high equity draw here. And if you ask yourself, how would you feel about 3-bet bluffing this spot? If you had King, Queen of clubs here, how would you feel about throwing in a 3-bet bluff? I'd feel pretty awful about it. And like I said in the last hand, if you really want to take a line for value, that might indicate that there's a better line available as a bluff. It might not, but oftentimes it does, so it's worth asking the question. And here, if we really don't want to take a line as a bluff because we think it's awful and the fold equity is really low, why are we slow playing? Right? Why are we not just taking that line for value? The reason people slow play here is that they say, well, you know, blockers, we have the board crushed and we have the toppest set. And it's like, well, is that a sufficient reason to slow play? Analyze the opponent's range. What's he actually got? He's almost never got a hand that's so bad that it can't call the flop but would blast off into you later. There are very few player types that would do that on certain boards. But on this board, pool is very equity driven, and there's almost nobody that's just got like some awful hand here, like pocket sixes, and is just going to rip it on you in the turn and river. That's just so rare. So don't play for that. Play for the common thing. The set over set, the cooler, the flush draw, that sort of thing. Okay, so we do go for the fast play here. Villain calls. We go for the turn bet. I just think I need to bet big enough here that I'm making draws pay some amount of money, right? I'm value betting against them. I'm giving them the chance to shove over me. I'm getting them to put money in before they brick. This isn't a case of like me being terrified about being outdrawn. But I do think, again, Villain's range is really equity driven, really quite strong. And I don't think if I check back here, I'm doing a great job of just eliciting bluffs from low equity stuff on river. I think I should just be getting value here against the plethora of mergy, middling to good stuff here that I'm kind of quote unquote coolering, right? So we just do this. Villain actually tanked for a while and said, I have a hand. And I thought that meant like he had ace queen and was just going to fold. And then he jammed and at tens and we won a stack. So yeah, probably whatever we do on this run out, we would have won a stack here. But there are many runouts where we don't win a stack from hands like this across turn and river if we start slow playing. And I just think it's so important to put the pool on a range, ask what people are really doing this with on the flop and play against that and try and maximize with your hand in these spots against a recreational player and not just fall back on very vague maxims like I block the top of set. All right, let's move on to the third point. Point 3 is hunger. Hunger is key because without hunger, there is no eating, and without eating, there is no sustenance and there is no win rate. So you've got to eat, you know? And to eat, you've got to be hungry and you've got to seek out the food. And the food is the dead money, and the eating is you winning the pot. And the sustenance is you winning in the game, if you follow the thread here. We have Jack 9 off on the button. And we open. It's called by the small blind. Every hand we've picked today, the small blind is flatting us. This is not just some rare anomaly. This is kind of GG 200 over and over. If the rake wasn't horrendous in this game, you could beat this pool for a really big clip. But the rake is kind of horrendous, so it puts a bit of a cap on win rates. So I've heard from pros that grind this game, there's somewhat of a ceiling, but it is beatable, right? This is not the kind of game where like you should never play it because it's literally poison and no one can win. It's hard to win. It is possible. And it's possible because even though the rake is high, some of the players are really quite bad. We have Jack 9 here. We go for 1/3 pot, 3-way. This is a hand with multiple backdoors. This is going to be a relatively high fold equity spot by the river most of the time. And the reason for that is that when people don't raise you on the flop here and don't 3-bet pre, their range is mostly capped at around ace 10, ace jack type stuff in this late position battle. So when we're called here by small blind, they have 8x, they have pocket pair, they have some weird hand like 3-5. They might have like king, queen, and clubs, and they have a lot of ace-x, right? That's kind of what's going on. On the turn, then, I think there are two options here. Barreling the turn just normally here is okay, right? You have two overcards to the 8. You have the jack of spades, which cuts back on the 8x of spades combo calling you that would fold if it wasn't spades, or some hand like king, jack of spades raising you off the pot or calling you and just winning at showdown or something like that. So jack of spades is a good thing here if you're going to do the whole GTO thing, the blocker thing. But I think importantly here, if you go for a plan of bet turn over bet river, I think it performs pretty well. So on the turn here, I actually committed to a plan. I planned out the next street. And I don't often do this when I'm teaching theoretically, because on the river, you know, there'll be different runouts you'll have to assess, and certain bluffs will be good on certain runouts, and you do want to get into the habit of not just making up your whole mind about what you're doing for the hand early on in the hand. You want to be assessing the board as it runs out and the line and all of that. But here, I think you can actually make a bit of a plan here and say, I'm going to bet the turn, and right away I'll clean up some equity against like pocket 7s, pocket 6s, 8x might fold, 3x might fold, king high might fold, that sort of thing. Ace-x will not fold, but as long as I don't get raised, which I probably will if villain has like ace-4 or something like that, or 3-4, usually, not always, then villain's range on the river is mostly one pair, right? So it's mostly like ace-9, ace-10, ace-jack. Gonna be a lot of stuff like that. It might be some 8x of spades, something like that. It might be some king-x of spades that bricked. So overall here, if we make a sizing, if we're hungry for pots like this and we throw out a bet like this, and do you know, when I'm overbetting against recreationals, sometimes I just like click the wrong thing. I do think that the difference in hindsight between like 45 and 52 is probably not worth going up to 52. So I do think there's a bit of room for just like being a bit more precise with that. But I do think this is a good sizing, nevertheless, like a good plan, even if it's not perfectly executed. And I think the fold equity on this node is really, really good. Like for betting this amount, which is just over 1.5x pot, we need just over 60% fold equity. So we're needing like 62% fold equity to break even here. And when you just ask me intuitively whether we get that, I'm just very confident that we do. I think the fold equity here is like maybe 2/3, something like that. I don't think it's like 3/4 of the time or 80% of the time. One, you can run into like ace-6 or something, or 8-6 of spades or something that's just never folding, or a weird slow play. And secondly, you can run into an absolute calling station. There are people in the pool that will just snap call you here with ace-jack. Or ace-7, I forgot what villain had. Because they just aren't the folding type. They just don't want to fold. And that's the kind of recreational I ran into here. But triple barrel in late position, typically it's a pretty overfolded node in most spots. Especially if you're against a capped range, like their range didn't uncap on the river. And especially if you go for like the overbet sizing here. But I think the overbet should be smaller. That's the one refinement I would make to this line. But just being hungry for that kind of fold equity in general, I think is a really good skill. And try not to look at bluffing as like you're fearing it. You're like, oh no, I hope my bluff doesn't get called. Look for spots where you think your fold equity exceeds the target that the pot odds are setting when you make a bet. In this case, low 60s, right? If you went 2x pot, 66%, learn the milestones, know what they are roughly. 1.5x pot is 60% required. And if you think you're exceeding that, be hungry, go for it. Like you're trying to earn your next meal, like you're hunting. Don't have this fear-based mentality. A-game poker is all about opportunism, being a vulture, and hunting the prey. It is not about, you know, firing out a bluff because you're terrified you won't win the pot, but you're also terrified the bluff will get called, and then it's like just a terrible mental game through and through, and that's the psychology you really want to try to move away from. Okay, next up, the fourth key to unlocking your A-game is game tree vision, having vision over what happens next if you take different options so that you can then figure out which of those options you prefer, right? So this time we have 10-9, we open the button, we get called by the small blind and squeezed by the big blind, who looked like a kind of tight reg, like the kind of classic GG200, knows how to play a VPIT PFR that's not ridiculous but isn't fantastic at poker. So with the allure of the recreational player getting involved here in a pretty nice hand, we do decide to peel here. I think it's not massively winning, but should be plus EV. Flop is 8-6 deuce, so with a gutter and overcards here, we're clearly just in call land against this. I don't like to see this bigger bet here. It's not fantastic, and I do think this is indicative of a pretty strong range overall when you see the sizing here. Probably mostly overpair driven, but there will be like ace-king in here that's just c-betting this size. There will be people who just c-bet the sizing. I do think this is already getting quite close on the flop. If this was much bigger, like 20 or something, it might even be a fold. But I think this is still just about a call. On the turn, we kind of turn as well as is possible with this hand without hitting a 7. And villain downsizes. And while this is an okay thing to do at this SPR in GTO terms, right, we shouldn't analyze a hand by saying, well, it's fine in theory, so therefore he's got the same range that the solver has. That's brain dead logic. That doesn't make any sense. We need to range the pool on what we think they have. And I think the size down here is a sign of weakness more than it is strength, unlike a flush draw turn. Mostly this pool, when they have kings or aces and they big bet the flop, will probably also big bet the turn or jam the turn. Not always, but a lot of the time. So I'm not saying he can't have those hands. It's possible to hand read in a direction to say that villain's range is shifting proportionately away from aces and kings and queens and a bit more towards 9s or 10s or ace-8 or ace-king or ace-queen or something that's bluffing. So game tree vision here comes down to the following sort of thought process. I figured that if villain has ace-king, ace-queen, king-queen, like the bluffing region, and we miss the river, which we will pretty often, I felt like there's a fair chance that we get bluffed on this run out anyway, or we not get bluffed, but like villain goes all in and we are forced to fold. If villain does check, we will have to risk extra money anyway by bluffing, like those times that we miss, so it's not the case that we can just like show down on too many rivers that don't complete the flush or straight or give us a pair. So we will have to risk the rest anyway on the river if villain does give up there, right? And you could argue that calling and seeing what happens and just folding the river is good if we think villain is like a really tight rig. When I think back to this hand now, I actually think this was more of an unknown. I don't know if I had that read. If I did have the read, they were nitty. I think I'm just calling the turn here probably. But yeah, game tree vision here is thinking on the river, ace king, ace queen will win the pot against me on bricks if I just call. A lot of the time, right? Because they're going to jam. Or if the river is an ace or a king or a queen and they have the overcards that hit that, I also lose the pot. And I win the pot by jamming the turn against ace king, ace queen, king queen, and all rivers. Like it doesn't matter what the river is, I will win the pot by jamming the turn because those hands are very, very likely to fold. The other category of hand is like 8, 9, ace 8, something like that, pocket 9s, pocket 10s, which I think is kind of likely for the sizing as well. I think that will fold some of the time when I jam the turn, not always. The other category of hand is like some big flush draw, like ace queen of diamonds or something like that, that I guess calls the turn if I jam, which is not so good. So all in all, there are definitely reasons to consider jamming here. I think on balance, now that I look at this, while I was thinking in the right way and I was trying to analyze like how often this was the overcards and all of that and how often it was the overpair, and I think my analysis is largely right that this is moving away from overpair towards the other stuff. I still wonder if call and then just bluff the river when check 2 might be a bit better, solely because this pool does just lean nitty and their triple barrels and 3-bit pots tend to be more value driven, and we may just see check folds from ace queen, ace king more than they should. I'm kind of thinking here that people ought to follow through on river fairly often with their overcards. Like I think an aggro reg actually overbluffs this node on river after the jack turn. But yeah, this pool is a bit nitty. So maybe the exploit against this pool specifically is just to call the turn and see what transpires on the river here. But I do think that against the average player, there's a lot of merit to this turn jam because of the fact that they just so frequently have these overcard combos that win the pot against me on so many rivers if I just call. We have a ton of equity against the overpair and stuff anyway when we get it in. And yeah, we might make a bunch of better hands that aren't bluffs fold here, like some thin value bets like 9s, 10s, and 8x. So I think the play is good overall, but against this pool, maybe there's an argument for just calling. We actually lost both against pocket 10s at tank called here. Good for them. But yeah, just looking at how the game tree unfolds, looking at the different parts of villain's range, trying to think in that sort of way. It's a complex spot. I'm still not 100% sure what's best, but that's the kind of thinking that to me quantifies a game poker. And finally, let's talk about backing your instincts, confidence, self-belief, going with the gut when it truly is the gut that's speaking and not the demons in your brain. First off, before we get into this hand, how do you tell the difference between a subconscious feeling that you can trust, i.e. your gut that's based on experience and feel, and subconscious processing that's too powerful and too mysterious for you to be able to actually put into words, and on the other hand, basically desires, cravings, urges, fears, that sort of thing. Because they can present similarly as unconscious leanings in a certain direction, right, towards a certain play. But they're very different, right? And here's how. So in this hand, this was based on feel, gut, reads, intuition, experience. I made a hero call here. We opened 9s, the flop came deuce for deuce. We checked the flop, just checking a lot of stuff out of position. This was a wild looking player, by the way. They had a really sort of 51-38 type stat line. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like that. Pretty easy call, and as soon as I see this, I'm just like, right, we are in a hotspot node. We're in an overbluff node from this player type. They've landed pre-flop with so many combos of overcards here, and even value hands that we beat, and they're quite likely to continue spewing in nodes like this on innocuous boards. This is like a fairly intuitive spot for recreationals to bluff in, so definitely we're looking at a landing range that's too wide, culminating in an overbluff line on most runouts here. That's my instinct, and on the ace turn, they bet again, and I'm still really happy here. I think the downsize, actually, if anything, is a good thing after pot and flop. Now, downsizing turn, usually when it's value here, and there's hardly any value here, but if it was, you would see pot, 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 or something like that. And this to me now just seems like it's got to be overbluffed. Okay, it's possible villain has just hit an ace and is now value betting like ace queen or something, or ace 5 or ace 10 or any of the ace x really. But I think there's just too much random stuff from this player type as well. 5s, 3s could be playing this way. Then there's like all sorts of unpaired offsuit cards that shouldn't be there pre-flop that are really bloating the bluff range here. So we decide to call again, and fully planning on calling river here, and this is fully gut driven. Villain goes back up to pot on river, which is usually a bad data point, like facing a triple barrel that's pot sized is something you normally want to fold to when you face this line. But if we dig a little deeper here and we say, well, what is villain actually repping? Now that this has happened, I don't think they're repping like ace jack anymore for the sizing. Even a maniac's usually going to bet smaller or check with ace jack on the river here. Some of them might merge to that extent, but I think it's kind of unlikely. They could have ace queen, ace king, but they're very likely to 3-bet that pre. Ace 8, I guess, is possible. Pocket 8s, if they really merge the turn, is not impossible. Like, sometimes we run into like a rare, weird hand like that. And the main thing villain reps here, credibly, is like ace 4, 4s, or quad deuces. And I was willing to say here that the player type plus the number of potential bluffs are just so significantly dwarfing the value range here that calling just has to be good. And this is fully based on instinct. And if I'm playing my C game, I might just level myself into folding because of discomfort and fear. But because I'm playing my A game, I just call down here. And I think it's a really, really winning call. And I'm super happy with it. And I ran into deuce 4 of hearts, by the way. I didn't win the hand, but I'm very happy with the thought process. And I think that's another mark of that's a bonus key to A game poker, by the way, not included in the list. But being able to be at peace with stuff even when it doesn't go your way. A sure way to tell when you're playing your F game is that every time something goes your way, you say you like it, and every time it doesn't, you say that you hate it. That's you're a leaf in the wind. Like, you're just getting blown about by poker. Like, what even are you at that point? You're a poker player, or you just like play a slot machine? Like, what are you? What are you? But yeah, how do we tell the difference between that sort of hand reading, having the conviction to follow an instinct, and having a craving or desire or fear? Well, if on the river you're feeling terrible as you go to call, but you're doing it due to a compulsion or a resistance against thinking or folding, it's motivated by a bias, like a kind of demon in your head. That's how you know it's a thought process you shouldn't be trusting. Whereas when it just comes from like a clear, distinct, pure place, like I just have this distinct, clear impression that calling is winning and I'm going to do it therefore, and I feel great about it, it's probably the right sort of thought process. So telling the difference between the gut, the feel, the experience, the instinct, all the subconscious processing on the one hand, and then the demonic lure or fear on the other hand, that's so key to playing a Ray game, is having a lot of the former and none of the latter. But yeah, I digress, I ramble. As always, hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I kind of purposefully did something here, I don't know if you noticed, but I decided to bring you hands that by and large were losing, but I was really happy with the play, right? A lot of these spots were hands of that nature, or at least I was okay with the play. And not only do I hope these have illustrated what A game poker looks like, but I also hope that these hands have shone some light on how to avoid results orientation. Like, when you're playing millions of hands, there will be hundreds, thousands of hands that you've played well and lost, or played badly and won. And when you're swept up in the result of the hand, it's so maddening and it's so distorting, and it makes poker really opaque and difficult to actually progress in. So yeah, we'll wrap up there. This video is probably coming out quite close to Christmas time or something like that. Maybe even on Christmas Day. If this is Christmas Day and you're watching this, yeah, happy Christmas, guys. Hope you're having a great one. First Christmas with my son Ruben. So really excited about that. The wife and I are going to celebrate with her family. And yeah, what can I say? It's awesome being a dad. It's also awesome to be back in the studios recording for you guys. carrotcorner.com is still here. You know, I went there when I got back into the office, and the website still exists. It still has poker courses, so that's good. You can get them at Carrot Corner if you want something to watch over the holidays. And we'll be back with more YouTube content soon. Bye for now, and have a great holiday season.